The cameras were rolling. The lights were blinding. The entire world was watching. Inside a gleaming international studio in Geneva, rows of global leaders, diplomats, and journalists filled the room. Flags from dozens of countries lined the stage. This wasn't just another debate, it was a summit meant to shape the future of foreign policy. At the center of the long, polished table sat Donald Trump, casually leaning back in his chair, smirking. His voice boomed through the speakers. "We practically built Africa," he said, waving his hand like swatting away dust. "Without us, most of you wouldn't even have electricity." There was silence, a long, painful one. A few audience members looked down, embarrassed. Some blinked rapidly, unsure of how to react. A young African woman in the crowd clenched her jaw, and then, a slight shuffle. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, dressed in crisp military attire, leaned forward. He calmly reached for the microphone, his fingers firm. "You think you own Africa," he said, his voice low yet powerful. "You don't even own your conscience." Gasps exploded across the studio. Trump flinched. The camera zoomed in. History had just shifted. The air inside the studio turned heavy. Journalists scrambled with their notepads. One woman dropped her pen. Cameras swung toward Traoré, his expression unreadable. Calm, composed, but behind his eyes, fire. Trump blinked rapidly, as if unsure whether he had just been slapped in real life or in a dream. He opened his mouth slightly, but nothing came out. Then the noise erupted. Not from Trump, but from the audience. A thunderous murmur rolled through the room. Some stood in shock. Others shook their heads. Social media was already on fire. The live feed had barely caught Traoré's final word before the clip began to spread. In Johannesburg, in Paris, in D.C. Millions were already replaying it. Did he really say that? Who is this man? Finally, someone said it. But Traoré didn't move. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply rested the mic back on the table like it weighed nothing at all. In the back row, a young boy watching from Burkina Faso stared at the screen in awe, his eyes watering. His mother whispered, "That's your leader." Outside, clouds began to gather. Inside the studio, a storm had already started. Trump was rarely speechless, but now he looked exposed. He shifted uncomfortably, then leaned forward toward the mic again, voice trembling slightly. That's uncalled for." But it was too late. Captain Traoré turned slowly, locking eyes with Trump. No anger, no arrogance, just a depth of truth that silenced every word Trump could form. "You talk like Africa is a business you own. It is not. It is a continent filled with mothers, fathers, warriors, dreamers, builders, and the blood of history you never cared to read." The crowd didn't erupt this time. They froze. Even the moderator, a seasoned BBC journalist, looked stunned. She leaned back in her chair, eyes glistening. The studio camera panned to her, then to Trump, then to Traoré, and then to the world. Across Africa, people wept in front of their screens, on balconies in Nairobi, in crowded cafes in Lagos, in rural schools across Mali. For once someone had spoken for them, not around them, and the man who did it was calm as a still mountain. As Traoré's words echoed, the silence inside the studio deepened. But outside? The world was boiling. In Nigeria, the broadcast was being played in a local community center. A group of university students sat huddled around a small TV. When Traoré said, "You don't even own your conscience," one of them stood up and shouted, "Say it again, Captain." In Washington, D.C., a young African-American journalist wiped tears from her eyes while typing out the headline, "An African leader finally spoke our pain." But back inside the studio, Trump's face was a mess of confusion and silent fury. He tried to regain control, chuckling dismissively. "Oh, here we go again. Blame America. Blame success." Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. "We're not blaming success," he said softly. "We're blaming the silence that followed your success, when your success was built on our pain." One camera caught the exact moment Trump's jaw tightened. Another caught the reaction of a South African journalist who whispered into her mic, "This is not just politics anymore. This is history." And around the world, millions felt something rise in their chest. Pride, rage, truth. Hidden in the very last row of the audience sat a boy barely 13. His name was Jules, a refugee from Burkina Faso who had won a scholarship to witness the summit. He didn't understand all the policies. He couldn't name every leader. But he knew one thing. He had never seen a man speak like this. As Traoré's voice filled the room, Jules squeezed the small, worn-out notebook in his hands. On the cover, a faded sentence in French read, "Un jour, je parlerai aussi." One day I will speak too. Tears streamed down his face, not because of sadness, but because for the first time he felt seen. A female journalist seated near him noticed. She placed a hand on his shoulder, gently whispering, "That man up there, he's yours." Jules smiled through his tears, and something stirred in his chest, something fierce. It wasn't just admiration, it was a promise. In the control room, a technician stared at the blinking viewership numbers. 4.2 million live viewers, then 4.5 million, and counting. This wasn't just going viral, this was a spiritual event, broadcast live. The moderator finally stepped in. Her voice was trembling. This wasn't the conversation she'd planned to host. "Let's move to the topic of foreign aid," she began. But Traoré raised a hand, not rudely but firmly. "If we skip the truth now, it will return to haunt us louder later." The moderator froze. Even she knew this was no longer her show. Trump leaned forward again, mocking. "You talk about pain, but America gave Africa billions. You should be thanking us." This time Traoré didn't reach for the mic. He stood. The camera followed as the captain slowly walked toward the front of the stage. His boots echoed across the studio floor. "You gave us loans with chains," he said. "Aid with cameras. Deals with fine print that killed farmers. You gave with one hand while the other took twice as much." An old man watching from Dakar dropped his cane. A grandmother in Congo clutched her chest. A woman in Harlem whispered, "God protect him." Even in the studio, one intern began crying quietly. She wasn't African, but the truth didn't care. It found every ear willing to listen. Traoré stared at Trump, and then for the first time, he smiled. But it wasn't victory. It was sadness. As the live broadcast continued behind the scenes, tension exploded. Trump's advisors gathered around a monitor, faces pale and voices hushed but urgent. "We didn't expect Traoré to be this bold," one whispered. Another added, "Social media is already blowing up. The clip's at 2 million views, and climbing." Meanwhile, Traoré's team stayed calm but alert. A senior aide pulled him aside quietly. "Sir, your words are shaking the world." Traoré nodded slowly. "That is the truth, no matter how uncomfortable." In the dim backstage room, a makeup artist dabbed tears off a journalist's cheek. "He speaks for my family," she whispered. The studio's walls, slick and modern, suddenly felt smaller, as if the old rules were cracking. The director called the broadcast back on air. Both leaders returned to their seats. But the air had changed. It wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a reckoning. Thousands of miles away, in a humble village in Burkina Faso, Aïssatou prayed. Her son Moussa was away studying in Europe, dreaming of making a difference. She had seen the clip of Captain Traoré, and her heart swelled with pride and hope. "God, protect our children," she whispered. Give them courage to stand when others silence them. Her hands trembled slightly as she held a faded photo of her family. The broadcast had become more than a message. It was a beacon. Neighbors gathered around her small radio, listening to a local station replay the heated exchange. One woman wept quietly. Finally, someone who knows our pain. Aisatu closed her eyes, feeling the weight of years of struggle lift just a little. Maybe, she thought, maybe the future is brighter than we believed. Back in the studio, millions held their breath. Every word, every pause, every glance between Traoré and Trump was analyzed, dissected, debated. News anchors worldwide discussed the moment for hours. On Twitter, hashtags trended. Kirsten Traoré Truth, Ker Africa, Speaks, Global Wake Up. A teenage boy in Lagos watched the debate on his cracked smartphone. His mother sat beside him, eyes wide. "This is the Africa I know," she said softly. In Paris, students debated fiercely over coffee. In New York, a professor paused his lecture to show the clip. Even distant cities like Sydney and Rio felt the ripple. The world wasn't the same anymore. But in the studio, the next challenge loomed. Trump was no longer just a politician. He was a man on the defensive. And Traoré? He was ready. The studio's atmosphere was thick, heavy with unspoken tension. The bright lights could not hide the tightening jaws or the burning eyes. Trump's usual swagger was gone, replaced by a flicker of doubt. He glanced at his notes, then back at Traoré. But the African captain remained calm, steady, a rock in a sea of chaos. Suddenly, Traoré leaned forward and said softly but clearly, "Africa is not a playground for power games." The room fell silent again. Across the globe, millions held their breath. Newsrooms paused their regular broadcasts to catch every word. In Dakar, children stopped playing to listen. In London, cafes buzzed with hushed conversations. The world seemed to wait for what would come next. Trump opened his mouth, but before he could speak, a technical glitch caused the studio lights to flicker. The moment hung, fragile, like the calm before a storm. Traoré's eyes never left Trump's. His voice, when he spoke again, cut through the silence like a blade. "You forget the faces behind the maps you redraw." Traoré's words painted pictures in everyone's minds. Not just countries or territories, but mothers, fathers, children. Real people living, loving, fighting, and dreaming. People whose lives had been shaped by decades of broken promises and forgotten histories. In a small village near Ouagadougou, an elderly woman clutched a photo of her late husband, a farmer who had lost his land to foreign corporations. Her eyes filled with tears. In New York, a young activist watched the broadcast with clenched fists, thinking of her own ancestors who had survived slavery and exploitation. The studio cameras caught the raw emotion of Traoré's voice as he continued, "You may redraw borders and claim resources, but you can never own our spirit." Trump shifted uncomfortably, but Traoré's words echoed beyond the studio walls, reaching hearts and minds. Outside the studio, the tension was palpable. Security tightened. Staff whispered urgently. This was more than a broadcast. It was a reckoning. Within minutes, social media exploded. Clips of Traoré's calm yet fiery rebuttal flooded timelines worldwide. Headlines screamed, "African leader silences Trump in historic broadcast." Traoré's words ignite global conversation on justice. But the response wasn't only from leaders or journalists. Everywhere, ordinary people shared their stories of struggle, resilience, hope. A teenager in Lagos wrote, "For the first time I feel proud. Someone is speaking our truth." A mother in Nairobi messaged, "My children will grow up knowing they are not forgotten." Even in Washington, ordinary citizens debated late into the night. Traoré's voice had become a beacon, and yet the broadcast wasn't over. The world waited, watching as the captain prepared to reveal more truths, truth that many had feared to face. Captain Traoré's voice softened. carrying the weight of history and pain. For centuries, Africa has suffered unseen wounds, wars not fought on our soil, but decided in boardrooms far away, dreams crushed under silent hands. Behind him, the studio's giant screen shifted to images of villages struggling, children walking miles for water, families rebuilding after storms. The room was still. Even Trump's eyes flickered with something unspoken. Traoré continued, "You speak of building, but what of the homes you left broken, the schools you forgot, the medicines you denied?" In a quiet home in Bamako, a widow held her child close, remembering her late husband lost to illness, one she believed could have been prevented. Across the ocean in a Bronx apartment, a young boy listened to his grandfather's stories of exile and resilience. Traoré's words connected them all, linking pain, hope, and the promise of change. The studio felt heavy with truth. No one dared look away. With every word, Traoré showed not just strength, but a deep, unshakable compassion. "I speak for the millions who have no voice in this room. For the farmers, the mothers, the children who deserve more than empty words." A camera zoomed in on his calm, steady eyes that had seen hardship but burned with hope. In a quiet village school in Burkina Faso, children repeated his words aloud, "We deserve more." A mother watching cried, whispering, "He fights for us." Traoré's calmness wasn't weakness. It was the heart of a leader who understood the true cost of power. Trump shifted uncomfortably, but the world was listening to a new kind of strength. The captain's words became a beacon, lighting a path toward dignity and respect. The broadcast wasn't just changing minds, it was changing hearts. The global conversation had shifted. Traoré's message sparked hope where there had been silence. Leaders in other countries took notice. Social media erupted with stories of resilience and unity. A young woman in Johannesburg wrote, "For the first time, I believe change is real." In Washington, debate shows discussed the moment for hours, some reluctantly admitting the truth Traoré had spoken. Back in the studio, Trump looked visibly shaken. The confident man was now fighting to reclaim the narrative. But Traoré remained composed. "This is not about one man or one country. This is about the dignity of an entire continent." The room held its breath as Traoré prepared to share what many feared, the truth about what Africa's future could be. And in that moment, millions around the world felt a tide turning, a powerful wave of hope, pride, and courage rising. The studio was silent. The moment had reached its peak. Captain Ibrahim Traoré looked straight into the cameras, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Africa's story is not yours to own, Mr. Trump. It belongs to the millions who wake every day fighting for their children's future." Millions around the world watched with bated breath, some with tears streaming down their faces. A mother in Lagos held her baby close, whispering, "At last, someone speaks for us." A student in Paris wiped sweat and tears, overwhelmed by hope. In that instant, Traoré was no longer just a leader. He was a symbol of resilience, courage, and truth. Trump's face was pale. His usual bravado vanished. This wasn't just a broadcast anymore. It was a moment etched into history. Traoré's closing words echoed like a heartbeat across the continents. One voice can break silence. One truth can shatter lies. One courage can inspire millions. The studio erupted in applause. The cameras caught faces, young and old, hopeful and determined. Backstage, Traoré's team embraced quietly. This was more than a victory. It was a call to action. Millions shared the clip, writing stories of pride, healing, and dreams rekindled. In small villages and bustling cities, people dared to hope again. Even those far from Africa felt the shift, a reminder of shared humanity. The world's balance had changed, and it all began with a calm man who refused to be silenced. As the broadcast ended, millions remained frozen on their screens. Captain Ibrahim Traoré's words had pierced hearts and minds worldwide. But the story does not end here. You are part of this new dawn. A dawn where truth is spoken, dignity is honored, and hope rises. If this story moved you, if it touched something deep inside, please do 3 things. Subscribe to our channel to join a community that values truth and courage. Like this video if you believe in the power of one voice to change the world. Comment below. Share your feelings, your hopes, your story. Let's start a conversation that reaches millions more. Together we carry this torch forward. Because change begins when we listen, when we stand, and when we speak. Thank you for being part of this journey.